What happened to the recession that was supposed to occur in 2025? Just a few months ago, we all sat down, we saw the tariff chart that the president put out, and people panicked. The stock market fell. Everybody said it was either going to be the Great Depression or the worst recession we have ever seen in our lives. Instead, we ended up seeing an all-time high just last week. So what is actually going on here, and what are the odds of truly seeing a recession? What are the pros? What are the cons and the cases on each side? Let's go ahead and break it down. So it's really, what are the cases? Because there are no, pros to a recession, at least in my mind. So the first thing is this: there is a potential for the prices to truly actually hit July 9th. That is when the Liberation Day tariffs are supposed to start. Now, I said this in a previous video, but the president does not expect to further delay those tariffs, and we gonna find out. Okay, and that's assuming that there aren't any new deals that are supposed to hit. If I remember correctly, there are some tariffs from Europe that could be as high as 50%. The baseline tariffs were 10%. Those are going to start hitting shelves, and we are going to start to see whether or not consumers are going to change their behavior. That is going to be what I argue is perhaps the biggest issue around the economy, because 60%, or really more than 60%, 2/3 of our economy is based on consumer spending. Once you start to see an item creep up in price, you, the consumer, have to decide, hey, I'm not going to buy that no more. Okay, or I'm going to start cutting back. And we've already discussed this before. It's going to be years before we can manufacture those things in the US. So it's not going to be, I'm just not going to buy it from there, I'm going to buy it from a US company. It's going to be, I'm not going to buy it at all, or I'm not going to buy as much. Once we stop spending as much, these companies are going to start to suffer. These companies may not grow as much in the market, and that is when you start to see companies cutting back, stop hiring, and you start to see the cycle moving into a recession. Remember the technical definition. You open up a dictionary, you see that a recession by definition is 2 consecutive quarters of GDP shrinkage, okay, of contraction. That means the stuff that we produce is smaller for 2 consecutive quarters. GDP is the stuff, again, the stuff that we produce. Now, when you ask the National Bureau of Economic Research, they take in a few other factors, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So that's just the spending side of it and the tariff side of it. But then there is unemployment. This is the other factor that the National Bureau of Economic Research takes into account. Now, while the textbook says one thing, it is the National Bureau of Economic Research. That's just, I always gotta say the full thing. That's just me. Sorry, I got a degree in economics, and we always gotta say the full thing. But in either case, they are the official body. I don't care what nobody else says. I don't care what the president says. No matter what I say, honestly, is what they say. They're the ones who officially declare whether it is a recession or not. All right? So they take in the GDP, they take in unemployment, spending, and all that stuff, and they are the ones who say, yes, it is or was a recession, or it is or was not. I say is or was because, quick time out, I know we've been talking a lot about investing today. However, if you don't know where to start or you haven't started yet, I have a free guide on how you can buy your first stock in just 20 minutes. To get that free guide, check out the link right here. All right, back to the video. It's always looking backwards. All right, it's never looking forwards. But right now, unemployment is at 4.2%, which is historically solid. That's not terrible. Now, we are seeing headlines about Walmart and some tech companies, UPS and others, doing some pretty big layoffs, and some companies saying that we're going to replace half the staff with AI and all that type of stuff, which it ain't good, right? But until we start to see major swaths of the labor force starting to be replaced or starting to get laid off, we're not really seeing the ripple effects of it. Now, I was personally laid off just a few months ago, and I'm gonna tell you, it ain't fun, right? And it certainly isn't something like, hey, this is the percentage, but it's not that big a deal. It's definitely a bigger deal if it's you, okay? So I definitely understand the human component of it, but looking at the number, once you start saying 7, 8%, then that is when it's, a much bigger deal from an eyebrow perspective. Like whether or not people are saying, okay, this is a problem, okay? But at 4.2%, it's not really ringing any alarm bells from an economic perspective. So unemployment is okay, and then tariffs haven't hit just yet, but it doesn't mean that they won't. But here is the biggest thing, the spending piece of it. And this is the part that really shocked me. In May, consumers didn't spend as much. In fact, consumer spending actually shrank by 0.1%. Now, why is this something that is, surprising? Well, it comes down to this. In May, we weren't really charging these tariffs. The tariffs are supposed to hit on, the major tariffs are supposed to hit on July 9th, which at the time I'm doing this video, it ain't July 9th. So people stopped spending, or not stopped spending, they spent less, it's a better term, they spent less money in May before the tariffs hit. And logically, you would think, I'm gonna spend my money now before the tariffs hit to get this out the way, right? If I need to buy a crib, if I need to buy, a fancy watch or whatever, prom dress, whatever it is you're buying, if it's coming from overseas, let me buy it right now before these expensive tariffs hit. Well, consumers were saying in May, hey, I'm gonna stop buying now, or I'm gonna buy less now. In June, we're gonna find out what they were spending and whether they're spending more or less. I would assume once it's getting even more expensive, people are going to spend less. We'll see if that is the case, but that is the first red flag or yellow flag at this point. So let's see what happens in June. But if people start to spend less, that is going to be your biggest tell if we are heading in a recession direction, which now moves us to JP Morgan. They are the ones who come out with, and they're not the only people, but they're perhaps the biggest, most famous, if you will, who come out with a recession percentage every year. Now, it was much higher, but they now have lowered it down to 40%. Now, in any year, they just put it at 15% as a baseline. They never put it at 0, which honestly I think that's smart. Okay, but 40% is, again, where they are right now. And they adjusted it because, at some point, tariffs were above 140% for China, for example. Good on them for changing it because, the bar is moving. So I get that. And for me, I kind of agree with that. If you were to ask me, given consumer spending moving down right now, where employment is, it's okay, and then we don't know what these tariffs are going to look like, I would also give it a moderate chance, which to me, in my mind, is somewhere between 30 to 40%. Because to me, in my mind, also an economy just doesn't fall off a cliff and immediately go into recession in 6 months. Now, could we find out that it could take 3 quarters, which means we wouldn't find out until April of 2026 that, yes, we are officially in a recession? Possible, right? But that's not something I'm going to be excited to predict, nor am I going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, this is what is going to happen. I would prefer us not to go into a recession. I would definitely prefer us not to have these tariffs to begin with, or at least have more targeted tariffs, some that make sense. I don't think a blanket tariff makes sense, which I've said, we've done a whole video on how I would go about tariffs if we were even going to do that. The main thing is, if you want to protect yourself from this as much as you can, or insulate yourself is probably a better word here, is stay ready so you ain't got to get ready. And that means both from your portfolio perspective, but just financially in general. Now, I've already said this, right? From my own personal experience, but before it happened to me, I told y'all back in January for our whole workshop and all that stuff. Stay ready so you ain't got to get ready. And how do you do that? From an investing perspective, okay? From an investing perspective, you want to make sure you have the right stocks based on what we think is going to happen. Right? You're not going to be able to predict everything. But if I see, right, we're already in July, I've already seen half of the playbook of what has worked this year. So perhaps I want to make those adjustments and have those things ready. What's going to be potentially recession resistant if that's the route that we're going to go? I'm ready for that. If you don't want to invest in it right now, at least have a short list of it and just have it, a list saved in your notes somewhere. These are the top 5 stocks I would buy if we go into a recession, right? Have it ready. You don't have to go and research it, right? You have those things set to the side. In terms of potential emergency, in terms of potential job interruption or whatever, have that extra cash. People always say, have that 3 to 6 months. You might want to increase that in case prices also increase. That's something that I did. So when it happened to me, right, I said, hey, I was ready. right? I had extra cash set aside. I had a higher investment balance just in case. And then I had things ready in my business to where it wasn't, you know, I can't say it wasn't a big deal because I was mad, right? But I had things in my business where it wasn't a let me scramble for everything. It was more so, all right, I knew this was a possibility. Now I can press this button, this button, this button. Because I had been saying it was a possibility, right? I knew tariffs could impact certain areas. I happened to be in one of those areas, right? So that was a part of it. It was the exact inversion planning that I had been talking about for months now. So this is your opportunity to stay ready today so you don't have to get ready down the line. If you want to know what that looks like and a whole video breakdown of how you can stay ready as well, check out this video right here.